My name is Nadia, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally built a life where the past couldn't touch me anymore. As an interior designer with my own studio in Chicago, I created beautiful spaces for others while trying to fill the empty spaces in my own heart. When you're abandoned by your mother at 8 years old, watching her take your sister but leave you behind, trust doesn't come easily. Then after 25 years of silence, a letter arrived. My mother needed something from me, something only I could give her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before I tell you how I responded when my mother suddenly reappeared in my life, let me know where you're watching from and click subscribe if you want more stories about overcoming family trauma. Growing up in our small suburban home in Pennsylvania, I have memories that sometimes feel like they belong to someone else's life. Before everything fell apart, there were moments of what seemed like normal family happiness. My father James was a mechanic who smelled like motor oil and always had a warm smile. My mother Diane worked part-time as a bookkeeper, her fingers always stained with ink. And then there was my little sister Sophie, just 2 years younger than me, with the same dark hair, but her eyes were bright blue like my mother's, instead of brown, like mine and my father's. Even in those early years, I sensed something was different in the way my mother looked at me versus how she looked at Sophie. When Sophie would run to her after preschool, my mother's entire face would light up. Her arms would open wide and she would scoop Sophie up into this enormous hug like she was embracing her whole world. When I would approach her after school, her smile never quite reached her eyes. Her hugs were brief, mechanical, like she was following a script of what mothers should do. I tried everything to win her approval. At 6 years old, I learnt to read early, hoping she would be proud. I would bring her drawings from art class with childish hearts and stick figures labelled Mummy and Me. She would tape Sophie's artwork to the refrigerator, while mine would mysteriously disappear. I kept my room spotless. I never complained when dinner wasn't something I liked. I was the perfect child, desperately trying to be worthy of the love that seemed to flow so easily to my sister. My father noticed. I would catch him watching my mother when she would brush past me to attend to Sophie. His face would darken momentarily before he would overcompensate, swooping me up onto his shoulders or asking me to help him fix something in the garage. "That's my girl," he would say. "Smart as a whip, just like her dad." Those moments with him were islands of warmth in an otherwise chilly childhood. The memory of my 7th birthday stands out painfully clear. My father had arranged a small party with a few friends from school. He had baked a chocolate cake himself, slightly lopsided, but covered in my favorite strawberry frosting. My mother sat at the kitchen table, checking her watch repeatedly as we played musical chairs in the living room. "Do we really need to drag this out, James?" I overheard her say to my father when he suggested we play another game before cake. "I have things to do, and Nadia seems fine already." "It's her birthday, Diane," my father replied, his voice tight. "One day a year, that's all I'm asking." She sighed heavily as if my birthday celebration was an unbearable burden. When it came time to blow out the candles, she stood behind Sophie, hands on her shoulders, while my father stood behind me. In the photograph from that day, the division is clear. Mother and Sophie, father and me, 2 separate families already, though we were still living under the same roof. Later that night, after I'd gone to bed, their voices woke me. They were arguing in their bedroom, my father's voice rising uncomfortably. "She's your daughter too, Diane. How can you not see what you're doing to her?" "I'm doing my best," my mother hissed back. "Some things can't be forced, James. This isn't about force. This is about basic decency. She's a child who needs her mother." Their fight continued, but I pulled my pillow over my head. Even at 7, I understood I was the problem, the reason for their unhappiness. If only I could be more like Sophie. If only I could make my mother love me. As I turned 8, the tension in our house stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. My mother became more withdrawn, especially around me. She would find reasons to be in different rooms. If I entered the kitchen while she was cooking, she would suddenly remember laundry that needed folding. If I sat next to her on the couch, she would get up to make a phone call. My father began working longer hours at the garage. I think it was partly to avoid the coldness that had settled over our home, and partly to make extra money. On weekends, he would take me to the park or movies, just the 2 of us, while my mother stayed home with Sophie. He never explicitly said it, but I think he was trying to give me at least one parent's undivided attention. "Your mum is going through some stuff," he would say vaguely when I would ask why she didn't love me. "It doesn't have anything to do with you, Nadia. Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with their kids, but children know when they're unwanted. No explanation could erase the reality I lived with daily. Every dismissed question, every ignored accomplishment, every hug that ended too quickly told me the same story. My mother couldn't love me, and I couldn't understand why. The day that changed everything was ordinary until it wasn't. It was a Tuesday in October, the leaves just beginning to turn golden and red. I remember because I had collected some particularly pretty ones on the walk home from school, planning to show them to my father when he got home from work. He had taught me the names of different trees, and I was proud I could now identify maple leaves from oak. When I pushed open our front door, calling out my usual, "I'm home," the house felt different. There was an energy in the air, a tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. Instead of the usual sounds of my mother preparing an after-school snack for Sophie, or the television playing cartoons, I heard drawers opening and closing upstairs. I dropped my backpack by the door and went to the kitchen. No snack was laid out. Sophie wasn't at the table colouring or doing her homework. I walked upstairs, my small hand sliding along the banister, those autumn leaves still clutched in my other hand. In my parents' bedroom, I found my mother pulling clothes from drawers and shoving them into a large suitcase laid open on the bed. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, her legs dangling, looking confused and clutching her favourite stuffed rabbit. "Mom," I said, my voice small, "what are you doing?" She startled slightly, as though she hadn't expected me home yet. For a moment, a look crossed her face that I couldn't interpret then, but now recognise as guilt mixed with resolve. "Nadia?" she said, her voice flat. "You're home early." "School ended at the same time as always," I replied, confused. "Where are you going? Are we going on a trip?" My mother stopped folding a sweater and turned to face me. Her blue eyes, so like Sophie's, were hard in a way I had never seen before. "Sophie and I are going away for a while," she said. "When are we leaving?" I asked, already moving toward my bedroom. "I can pack really fast. Dad taught me how to fold clothes really small so they fit better in the suitcase." "No, Nadia," she said, and her voice stopped me in my tracks. "Just Sophie and me. You're staying here with your father." The leaves fell from my hand to the carpet. Red maple, yellow oak, scattered like drops of blood and gold at my feet. "I don't understand," I said, my voice hardly more than a whisper. "Did I do something wrong? I can be better. I promise I can be better." My mother sat on the edge of the bed next to Sophie, who looked between us with wide, frightened eyes. "This isn't about you being good or bad, Nadia," my mother said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just can't do this anymore. I can't force myself to." She paused, seeming to reconsider her words, but then plunged ahead. "I can't force myself to love you the way a mother should. It's not fair to any of us to keep pretending." The world tilted beneath my feet. Even at 8, I understood the enormity of what she was saying. My worst fear, the thing I had sensed but couldn't name, was being spoken aloud. My mother didn't love me, couldn't love me. "But you love Sophie," I said, tears beginning to spill. "You're taking her. Sophie and I have a special bond," my mother said, placing a hand on my sister's head. "It's different." "I can be different too," I pleaded, moving toward her. "Please, Mom, please don't leave me." She stood up, creating distance between us. "Some things can't be fixed, Nadia. She hesitated again. "You remind me too much of things I want to forget. It's not your fault, but I can't change how I feel." Sophie began to cry, then finally understanding what was happening. "I want Nadia to come," she said, reaching for my hand. "Hush, Sophie," my mother said. "We've talked about this. It's better this way." But Sophie, at 6 years old, couldn't comprehend how separating sisters could be better for anyone. "Nadia helps me with my shoes," she argued, as if this simple fact would change our mother's mind. My mother finished packing swiftly after that, ignoring my continued pleas. I followed her downstairs, begging, promising, bargaining in the desperate way that children do when their world is collapsing. "I'll clean the whole house every day. I'll get straight A's forever. I won't ask for any birthday presents. Please, Mom, please don't go. Please don't take Sophie away from me." She loaded the suitcases into the car while I stood on the driveway, tears streaming down my face, hiccuping with sobs. When she guided Sophie to the car, my sister reached back for me. "I want Nadia," Sophie cried, her small hand stretching toward mine. I lunged forward, grabbing her fingers briefly before my mother pulled her away. "Enough, Sophie," my mother said firmly. "Get in the car now. Your sister will be fine with your father." The last image I have of them leaving is Sophie's tear-streaked face pressed against the rear window, her hand flat against the glass as my mother drove away without looking back once. I stood in the driveway until the car disappeared from sight, then collapsed onto the concrete, those autumn leaves now crushed beneath my knees. That's where my father found me hours later, when he returned from work still sitting in the same spot, no longer crying, but staring blankly ahead, my body occasionally shuddering with the aftershocks of sobs. His face, when he realized what had happened, is something I'll never forget. Pure anguish, followed by a fury I had never witnessed from my gentle father. "She took Sophie. She left you here alone," he kept repeating, as if the information wouldn't process. He called the police immediately, but their response was lukewarm at best. There was no custody arrangement since my parents were still legally married. My mother had left a note for my father that I hadn't seen explaining her decision to leave. She had taken Sophie across state lines, they eventually discovered, making it even more complicated. That night my father held me as we both cried ourselves to sleep in his big bed. "I'm so sorry, Nadia," he whispered into my hair over and over. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know she would do this. I didn't know she could do this." But even in my child's mind, I knew. I had always known my mother was capable of leaving me. I just never imagined she would choose Sophie over me so completely. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. My father took time off work to stay with me. He contacted lawyers, but was told repeatedly that without evidence of abuse or neglect, there was little he could do to force my mother to return with Sophie. He could fight for divorce and custody, but that would take time and money we didn't have. "Why doesn't she love me, Dad?" I asked one night as he tucked me into bed, his eyes filled with tears. "Your mother is broken inside, Nadia, in ways that have nothing to do with you, nothing at all to do with how wonderful, smart, and lovable you are." But no matter how many times he told me it wasn't my fault, I couldn't believe him. If I had been better, different, more lovable, my mother would have stayed. She would have taken me too. These were the thoughts that haunted me as I tried to adjust to a new reality where half of my family had chosen to disappear. The weeks following my mother and Sophie's departure were a haze of confusion. I kept expecting them to return to have my mother realize she had made a terrible mistake. I would wake up and rush to check if Sophie was back in her bed. I would listen for my mother's footsteps in the kitchen. But the house remained eerily quiet except for my father and me. School became a nightmare. How do you explain to third-grade classmates and teachers that your mother decided she didn't want you anymore? The school counselor tried to help, speaking in soft tones about family changes and adjustments, but her words were just buzzing in my ears. My grades slipped from A's to C's as I sat in class, unable to focus on anything but the hole in my chest. My father found a child therapist, Dr. Marshall, who specialized in trauma. Twice a week after school, I would sit in her office with its sky blue walls and draw pictures while trying to articulate feelings I didn't have names for yet. "It's okay to be angry, Nadia," she would tell me when I insisted I wasn't mad, just sad. "But if I get angry, maybe my dad will leave too." I confessed one day, 6 months after my mother left. Dr. Marshall helped me understand that my father wasn't going anywhere, that his love wasn't conditional on me being perfect, or never having negative emotions. She taught me coping mechanisms for when the sadness felt too big, like deep breathing and visualization. But even the best therapy couldn't answer the fundamental question that haunted me. Why did my mother take Sophie but leave me? My father threw himself into being both parents. He learnt to braid my hair, though the results were often lopsided. He joined the PTA, the only father among a sea of mothers. He took a better-paying job at an auto dealership instead of the independent garage he loved, ensuring we had health insurance and enough money for me to participate in school activities. At night, after he thought I was asleep, I would sometimes hear him crying quietly in his room. During the day, he never spoke ill of my mother, no matter how much I pushed. "Your mother is still your mother, Nadia," he would say when I called her mean or bad. "And someday you might want a relationship with her. I don't want my words to stand in the way of that." His restraint was remarkable given the circumstances. He had lost his wife and one daughter in a single day, left to raise a traumatized child alone. Yet he never used me as a sounding board for his own grief or anger. On my 9th birthday, a card arrived from Sophie. Inside, her childish handwriting read, "I miss you. Mom says maybe I can call you on Christmas." It was the first confirmation that my sister still thought about me. I carried that card everywhere until it fell apart at the creases. The promised Christmas call never came. Instead, another card arrived with a picture of Sophie standing next to a Christmas tree in an unfamiliar living room. No phone number, no address, just Love Sophie, written in handwriting that was clearly guided by my mother. Each year on my birthday, a card would arrive from Sophie. As she got older, her messages grew longer, though still carefully vague about their location or circumstances. I'm doing ballet now. I lost 2 teeth this year. My teacher says I'm good at math like you were. Each card was both precious and painful. When I was 12, the phone rang one evening while my father and I were having dinner. He answered, then his eyes widened as he looked at me. "Nadia, it's Sophie," he said, holding out the receiver. My hands shook as I took the phone. "Hello, Nadia." The voice was higher than I remembered, but unmistakably my sister's. "Is that really you?" "It's me," I said, tears already forming. "Sophie, where are you? Are you okay?" "We're in Arizona," she said, then quickly added, "But don't tell Mum I told you. She doesn't know I called. I found Dad's number in her address book." For 10 precious minutes, we tried to condense 4 years of separation into a frantic conversation. Sophie told me about her school, her friends, that our mother worked as an office manager now. She asked about my life, about Dad, if I still liked to draw. Then I heard a voice in the background on her end. "Sophie? Who are you talking to?" The panic in my sister's voice was clear. "I have to go," she whispered urgently. "Mom's back. I love you, Nadia." "Sophie, wait," I cried, but the line was already dead. That night I sobbed into my pillow until I had no tears left. The brief connection, followed by another sharp severing, was almost worse than no contact at all. My father sat with me, rubbing my back until I fell into exhausted sleep. After that call, the birthday cards stopped coming. I can only assume my mother discovered Sophie's call and put an end to any communication. The silence that followed was deafening. As social media emerged in my teen years, I became obsessed with trying to find them online. I would search Sophie's name regularly, but with no idea what city in Arizona they lived in, it was impossible to narrow down results. My mother had reverted to her maiden name Williams, making her even harder to track. My father continued to encourage me to focus on building my own life, rather than looking backward. "The best revenge is living well," he would tell me. "Show her what she missed out on by becoming the amazing woman I know you're going to be." His unwavering belief in me became my North Star. When grief threatened to pull me under his steady presence, reminded me that I was worthy of love, even if my mother couldn't see it. High school brought new challenges as my abandonment issues manifested in perfectionism and difficulty forming close friendships. I excelled academically, but kept people at arm's length. Getting close to someone meant risking them leaving. Every unanswered text or cancelled plan confirmed my deepest fear. People would always leave me eventually. Art became my refuge. In the art room at school, I could lose myself for hours creating worlds where I controlled what stayed and what went. My art teacher recognized my talent and encouraged me to consider design school. "You have an eye for how spaces work," she told me, "how colors and shapes affect emotions. That's a gift." When it came time for college applications, I focused on design programs, eventually earning a scholarship to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Moving away from my father was terrifying, but he insisted I needed to spread my wings. "I'm only a phone call away," he promised. Always. College introduced me to Jackson, my first serious boyfriend. Creative, thoughtful, and patient, he slowly worked his way past my defenses. For the first time, I let someone besides my father see the wounded parts of me. "I don't understand why she couldn't love me," I admitted to him one night after telling him the full story of my mother's abandonment. "Some people are too broken to love properly," he said, holding me close. "It wasn't about you, Nadia. It was never about you." But despite his reassurances, I sabotaged our relationship. When things got too comfortable, too secure, panic would set in. What if he left too? Better to end things on my terms than be blindsided again. After a year together, I broke up with him for reasons even I knew were excuses. I graduated with honours, my father beaming with pride at the ceremony. "Your mother has no idea what she's missing," he said as we celebrated over dinner. It was one of the rare times he referenced her directly. With my degree in interior design, I was ready to build a career and a life that had nothing to do with the girl who wasn't enough for her mother to stay. With my design degree in hand, I moved through my 20s with singular focus. I was determined to build a life so complete that the empty spaces left by my mother and sister would be filled with achievement and purpose. My first job was with a small design firm in downtown Chicago. I started as a junior designer, mainly handling administrative tasks and creating preliminary sketches for senior designers. But I stayed late every night, volunteered for the most challenging projects, and slowly built a reputation for creativity and reliability. "You work like someone's chasing you," my boss commented once, not unkindly. "Just ambitious," I replied with a tight smile, not admitting that what chased me was the fear of not being enough. Again. By 26, I had been promoted 3 times and had begun to develop my own client base. My specialty became residential spaces, transforming cold houses into warm homes. The irony wasn't lost on me that I created for others the feeling of belonging I had sought my entire life. One client, after seeing her completed living room renovation, hugged me with tears in her eyes. "It feels like coming home should feel," she said. Her words stayed with me, becoming something of a personal mission statement. At 28, I took the leap and opened my own studio, Belonging Designs. The name was personal to me, though clients assumed it referred to their sense of belonging in the spaces I created. My father helped me renovate a small storefront, painting walls and installing shelving, just as he had done in our home growing up. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo," he said, standing back to admire our work on opening day. At 56, his hair had more grey than brown now, and years of physical labour had left him with a slight stoop to his shoulders. But his eyes still held the same unwavering love and support that had carried me through my darkest days. My studio quickly gained attention in Chicago's design community. A feature in Chicago Home magazine led to a steady stream of clients, allowing me to hire 2 assistants. Success, I discovered, was both validating and empty. I had proven my worth professionally, but my personal life remained cautiously guarded. Then Taylor came into my life. She applied for a position as my design assistant, bringing a portfolio that showed raw talent and a personality that wouldn't take no for an answer. Unlike others who tiptoed around me, sensing my emotional walls, Taylor barreled through them with humour and persistence. "We're getting lunch," she would announce, not ask, pulling me away from my desk when I worked through too many meals. "The world will not end if you eat a sandwich, Nadia." Slowly, Taylor became more than a colleague. She became the first true friend I had allowed myself since childhood. She didn't press when I was quiet, but listened when I was ready to talk. When I finally told her about my mother and Sophie one night over wine in my apartment, she didn't offer platitudes. "That's seriously messed up," she said bluntly. "No wonder you keep people at a distance." Her straightforward acknowledgement of the enormity of what had happened was strangely healing. No minimizing, no silver linings, just recognition that a terrible thing had been done to a child who didn't deserve it. With Taylor's friendship providing a new kind of safety, I cautiously began dating again. Michael entered my life at a home show where he was representing his architectural firm. Tall, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence, he asked thoughtful questions about my design philosophy instead of making small talk. Our relationship progressed slowly on my terms. I told him early about my abandonment, not wanting to waste time if he couldn't handle my baggage. Instead of being scared off, he showed up more consistently, texting when he said he would never, cancelling plans, demonstrating through actions rather than words that he could be trusted. "I'm not easy to be with," I warned him after 6 months of dating. "I'm not looking for easy," he replied. "I'm looking for real." As my personal life expanded, so did my professional reach. I was commissioned to redesign a wing of the Children's Hospital, a project that resonated deeply with me. Creating a space where frightened children and worried parents could feel calm and hopeful tapped into something profound. This led to pro bono work for a local foster care organisation, redesigning their family visitation rooms. The director had tears in her eyes when I presented my proposal. "These children deserve beauty and dignity during difficult times," I explained. What I didn't say was that I saw myself in each of those children, wondering if they were somehow at fault for their circumstances. Throughout these years, I continued occasional internet searches for Sophie. Social media was more developed now, but still no luck. I wondered if she ever looked for me too. My father's health began to decline when I was 30. Nothing catastrophic, just the accumulated wear of a lifetime of physical work and emotional strain. Arthritis made his mechanic work painful, forcing early retirement. I insisted he move to Chicago, setting him up in a comfortable condo near my apartment where I could check on him regularly. One evening, as we sorted through boxes he had brought from Pennsylvania, we came across a photo album I hadn't seen before. Inside were family photos from before the separation. My mother's face looked different than I remembered. There was a tightness around her eyes, a disconnect even in moments that should have been joyful. She was unhappy long before she left, wasn't she? I asked my father. He sighed heavily. Your mother had her own demons, Nadia. Depression she wouldn't address. Family history she wouldn't talk about. I thought love would be enough, but sometimes it isn't. For the first time, I saw my mother as a full person, not just the woman who abandoned me. It didn't excuse her actions, but helped me understand them in a new light. She wasn't a monster. She was broken, and in her brokenness, she shattered our family. This realization prompted me to return to therapy, finding a new therapist who specialized in adult children of parental abandonment. Dr. Chen helped me work through the complex grief I had carried for over 2 decades. You've built an impressive life, she noted in one session, but you're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was right. Despite my success, despite Michael and Taylor and my father's steady presence, I still braced for loss. I still believed deep down that I was fundamentally unlovable. Working through these beliefs became my focus, learning to separate my mother's limitations from my worth. My 30th birthday marked a turning point. Instead of treating it like any other day as I had for years, I allowed Michael and Taylor to plan a celebration. Friends and colleagues gathered at my favorite restaurant, my father giving a toast that left few dry eyes. To my daughter, who has faced more heartbreak than anyone should, and emerged with a heart still capable of creating beauty and love. You are the greatest gift of my life, Nadia. For the first time in many years, I felt truly happy on my birthday. The absence of Sophie and my mother was still there, an empty chair at the table of my life, but it no longer dominated the room. As I entered my 30s, I began to believe that perhaps the worst was behind me, that the abandoned child I had been was finally healing into the woman I was becoming. Michael and I spoke of a future together. My business thrived. My relationship with my father deepened as I cared for him the way he had always cared for me. Then the letter arrived, tearing open wounds I thought had finally scarred over. It was an ordinary Tuesday, much like the Tuesday 24 years earlier, when my life had first shattered. I was at my studio reviewing fabric samples for a lakefront condo project when my assistant brought in the mail. There's a certified letter, she said, holding out the slip. You need to sign for it. Annoyed at the interruption, I scribbled my signature without much thought. It was probably just contract documents from a vendor. The return address caught my eye as I was about to toss it onto my desk to open later. Diane Williams, Phoenix, Arizona, my mother's name. My hands began to shake so badly that the letter fell to the floor. Taylor, seeing my face drain of color, rushed over. Nadia, what's wrong? I couldn't speak, just pointed at the envelope now lying at my feet. Taylor picked it up, glanced at the return address, and immediately understood. She had heard enough about my mother to recognize the significance. Do you want me to open it? She asked gently. I shook my head. Not here, not now. I slipped the letter into my bag, trying to ignore its presence like an unexploded bomb. I'll look at it tonight. But concentration was impossible for the rest of the day. What could my mother possibly want after 24 years of silence? Was Sophie okay? Had something happened to her? The questions circled like vultures as I pretended to work rearranging the same fabric samples over and over without seeing them. That evening, I called Taylor before opening the letter. Can you stay on the phone with me? I don't want to be alone for this. Of course, she said without hesitation. I'm right here. Tam. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photograph and a business card for a medical practice. Dear Nadia, I hope this letter finds you well. I have been diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease and require a transplant. Sophie has been tested but is not a compatible donor. My doctors suggested reaching out to immediate family members, which is why I'm contacting you after all this time. Would you consider being tested to see if you are a match? I understand. This is a significant request given our history, but my options are limited. I've enclosed my doctor's contact information if you are willing to discuss this further. Sophie and I have built a life in Phoenix. She graduated from Arizona State 3 years ago and works as an elementary school teacher now. I've enclosed a recent photo from her graduation. I know this is unexpected. Family is complicated, but in times of need, blood connections matter. Please consider my request. Diane Williams. No, I'm sorry. No acknowledgement of abandonment, no recognition of the years of silence. Just a medical need and an appeal to family, as if that word still held meaning between us. I stared at the photograph, Sophie at her college graduation cap and gown standing beside our mother. My sister had grown into a beautiful young woman with the same dark hair and blue eyes I remembered. Our mother looked older, of course, her once dark hair now grey lines around her eyes and mouth. They were smiling at the camera, looking like a normal mother and daughter celebrating a milestone. Where was my graduation photo with the parent? Oh, right, my father had been there beaming with pride. The parent who stayed. She wants my kidney, I said flatly to Taylor, still on the phone. She abandoned me, took my sister, disappeared for 24 years, and now she wants a piece of my body. Holy shit, Taylor breathed. I don't even have words for what that is. The audacity, I continued, anger building where shock had been. To write as if we've just been out of touch, not that she literally told an 8-year-old child she couldn't force herself to love her. I called my father immediately after hanging up with Taylor. His reaction mirrored mine initial shock, followed by protective anger. You don't owe her anything, Nadia, he said firmly. Not a response, not consideration, certainly not an organ. I know, I replied. But what about Sophie? This is a connection to my sister. My father sighed. That's your decision, sweetheart. Just don't let your desire to reconnect with Sophie pressure you into something you're not comfortable with regarding your mother. Michael came over that night, holding me as I cycled through rage, disbelief, vindication, she needed me now, how ironic, and a surprising flicker of pity. Take some time before you respond, he advised. This isn't a decision you need to make tonight. But the letter consumed me. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep without dreaming of my mother, and Sophie couldn't eat without feeling nauseated. The carefully constructed life I had built felt suddenly fragile, as if my mother's reappearance had revealed it to be nothing but a house of cards. After a week of internal turmoil, I made a decision. I would not contact my mother directly. Instead, I found Sophie's email through her school's website. With heart pounding, I composed a message, Sophie. This is your sister Nadia. Mum contacted me about her kidney disease. I'd like to speak with you directly before making any decisions. My number is below if you're willing to talk. I've missed you every day for 24 years. Nadia 3. Agonizing days passed before my phone rang with an Arizona number. I answered with shaking hands. Nadia? The voice was adult now, but with echoes of the little girl I had known. It's Sophie. I can't believe it's really you, Sophie said, her voice catching. I've imagined this conversation so many times. We were both crying within seconds, 24 years of separation, compressed into the space between hello and the first tearful laugh. I tried to find you, she continued, so many times over the years, but Mom always said... She paused and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. What did she tell you, Sophie? I asked, though I suspected the answer. She said you didn't want contact with us, that you and Dad had moved on and preferred to leave the past behind. Sophie's voice hardened slightly. I believed her until I was in college and tried to find you myself. That's when things stopped adding up. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years I had wondered if Sophie remembered me, if she ever thought about me. She had been fed lies about my willingness to have a relationship. That's not true, I said firmly. Dad and I tried to locate you both after you left. We never moved from our house in Pennsylvania until I went to college in case you ever came back or tried to find us. Sophie's sob tore through the phone. I wrote you letters, dozens of them, birthday cards every year until I was 15. Mom said she was mailing them. I only received cards until I was 12. I told her. Then they stopped. I thought you had forgotten me. Never, Sophie insisted. You were my big sister. I cried for you every night for years. We talked for 3 hours that first call, piecing together the fragments of our separate lives. Sophie described a childhood of constant moving as our mother jumped from relationship to relationship, never staying in one place long enough to form roots. She always had a boyfriend or husband who was going to solve all our problems, Sophie explained. When each relationship inevitably fell apart, we'd pack up and start over somewhere new. My stable upbringing with our father there in the same house, same school district, sounded like a fantasy to her. The grass is always greener, I thought. Bitterly. While I had mourned the loss of my mother and sister, Sophie had longed for the stability I had. Did she ever talk about me? I couldn't stop myself from asking. Sophie hesitated. She would say you were difficult, that you were better off with Dad. that you were too much like her mother, who she hated. Another pause. I knew it wasn't true, even as a kid. You were the kindest big sister. The mention of our grandmother was new information. What was wrong with her mother? I don't know details, Sophie admitted. She never wanted to talk about her childhood. All I know is she was raised by a single mother who she described as cold and unloving. History repeating itself, I thought, except my mother had become the very thing she hated. As our conversation wound down, Sophie asked the question hanging between us. Will you get tested for the kidney? I don't know, I answered honestly. It's a lot to process. Would you be willing to meet me in person? Sophie asked, vulnerability clear in her voice. I'm on spring break next week. I could fly to Chicago. The thought of seeing my sister face to face after all these years made my heart race. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'd love that. We arranged for Sophie to stay in my guest room the following week. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, processing everything I had learned. My mother had actively prevented our relationship, feeding both of us lies to keep us apart. The depth of that betrayal was almost harder to comprehend than the original abandonment. When Sophie arrived at my apartment 5 days later, we both froze for a moment, just staring at each other. She was both familiar and a stranger. Then she dropped her bags and we collided in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked us over. You look like Dad, she whispered, touching my face with trembling fingers. You look like Mom, I replied, studying her blue eyes so different from my brown ones. Sophie had brought a box of memorabilia with her. Inside were photos of her growing up school projects, and most painfully, a stack of letters addressed to me in increasingly mature handwriting. Letters my mother had never sent. I kept copies, Sophie explained, watching me handle them reverently. Something told me to. I showed her my design studio, introduced her to Taylor and Michael, and took her to meet our father. That reunion reduced all three of us to tears. My father, now in his early 60s, embraced the daughter he hadn't seen since she was 6 years old. You grew up beautiful, he told her, his voice rough with emotion. Just like I knew you would. Over dinner that night, Sophie revealed more about our mother's current situation. The kidney disease had progressed rapidly. Dialysis was keeping her alive, but her quality of life was poor. The transplant list wait time was longer than her projected survival. I'd be tested again, Sophie said, but my blood type isn't compatible. The doctors said siblings often are the best match. Have you told her we're in contact? I asked. Sophie shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to see you first without her influence. As we talked more about our mother, a decision crystallized in my mind. I think we should go see her together, I said. In Arizona. I need to face her before I can decide about the testing. Sophie's eyes widened. Are you sure? I wasn't sure at all. The thought of seeing my mother again after all these years filled me with dread and anger. But I knew I needed closure, needed to look her in the eye and ask why. Not just for the kidney decision, but for my own healing. I'm sure, I said with more confidence than I felt. Let's go next month. The flight to Phoenix 4 weeks later was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. Sophie had finally told our mother about our reunion and my visit, which had apparently sent her into a panic. She's afraid, Sophie observed. She knows she has to face what she did. My mother lived in a modest ranch house in a Phoenix suburb. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt like I might be sick. 24 years of hurt, anger, and questions churned inside me as Sophie unlocked the front door. Mom, she called. We're here. And then suddenly there she was, my mother, older, frailer than in the photograph, with an ashen quality to her skin that spoke of her illness, but unmistakably the woman who had left me behind because she couldn't force herself to love me. Her eyes, still that same blue that Sophie had inherited, widened at the sight of me. For a moment no one spoke. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Nadia, she finally said, her voice smaller than I remembered. You came. Not for you, I replied, my voice steady, despite my internal turmoil. For Sophie, and for myself. She nodded slowly, accepting this. You look like your father. The parent who stayed, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Sophie touched my arm gently, a silent reminder of our agreement to stay calm. We moved to the living room, the three of us forming a triangle of tension. My mother lowered herself carefully into an armchair, her movements betraying her weakness. Thank you for considering the testing, she began businesslike. I haven't decided anything yet, I cut in. I came here for answers first. Real answers, not the lies you've been telling Sophie about me not wanting contact. My mother flinched, her eyes darting to Sophie, who stood firm beside me. I see you two have been talking. For the first time in 24 years, I said. No thanks to you. What followed was the most difficult conversation of my life. I laid out every painful memory, every question that had haunted me since childhood. Why did she leave me? Why take Sophie but not me? Why prevent us from communicating? At first, my mother was defensive, making excuses about her mental state back then, about the pressure of raising 2 children. But as I continued, something in her seemed to crack. You reminded me too much of my mother. She finally admitted, tears streaking her hollow cheeks. Her eyes, her mannerisms. Every time I looked at you, I saw the woman who made my childhood a living hell. I thought I could overcome it, but after Sophie was born, she trailed off. So you punished an innocent child for a resemblance? I asked incredulously. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To believe I was fundamentally unlovable? I wasn't thinking clearly, she whispered. Depression, unresolved trauma. I convinced myself you were better off without me, that James would give you what I couldn't. And the lies you told Sophie. The intercepted letters. What was your excuse for that cruelty? She had no answer for this, just dropped her gaze to her hands, folded in her lap. Sophie, who had been quiet during my confrontation, finally spoke up. You kept me from my sister and my father. You told me they didn't want me when that wasn't true. Her voice grew stronger. I missed out on having a family because you couldn't face your own issues. It was the first time I had heard Sophie stand up to our mother, and pride swelled within me despite the painful circumstances. My mother began to sob deep, gut-wrenching sounds that would have moved me if the wounds weren't still so raw. I know, she gasped between sobs. I know what I did was unforgivable. I've known it for years, but was too ashamed, too afraid to try to make amends. Until you needed something from me, I pointed out coldly. She nodded, not denying it. The kidney disease forced me to face everything I've been running from. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Nadia. Not forgiveness, certainly not an organ. But I'm asking anyway because I want to live. I want a chance to try to make things right, even if it's too late. I stood up, needing space, needing air. I'll get tested, I said finally. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to know I'm nothing like you. That I wouldn't let someone suffer if I could prevent it, even someone who hurt me deeply. Relief washed over her face, quickly replaced by shame at my reasoning. Sophie squeezed my hand in silent support. We left shortly after checking into a nearby hotel rather than staying in her house as originally planned. That night, Sophie and I stayed up late, talking, processing the confrontation and what would come next. Are you really going to do it if you're a match? Sophie asked. I don't know, I answered truthfully. Part of me thinks she doesn't deserve my help. Another part thinks this might be the only way I'll find peace. The next morning, I contacted my mother's doctor to arrange testing in Chicago. As Sophie and I prepared to return home, I felt strangely lighter. Not healed, not forgiving, but somehow more whole for having faced the source of my deepest wound. Upon returning to Chicago, I scheduled the donor compatibility testing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The process involved multiple blood tests, tissue typing, and a thorough medical evaluation to determine if I was physically eligible to donate. Throughout the testing, I remained ambivalent about what I would do if I proved to be a match. Michael was concerned. This is major surgery we're talking about, he reminded me, for someone who abandoned you. Are you sure you're doing this for the right reasons? I'm not sure of anything, I admitted. But I need to know if I'm even a viable donor before I torment myself with the decision. My father, ever supportive, simply said, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But promise me you're putting yourself first for once, Nadia. Sophie remained in Chicago, extending her spring break to stay with me while we awaited results. Our reconnection deepened daily as we filled in the missing pieces of each other's lives. She followed me to my studio, marveling at the business I had built. You created all this despite everything, she said, running her hand along a design board. I'm so proud to be your sister. Her words meant more than any professional accolade ever had. 2 weeks after the testing, my phone rang with the hospital's number. I answered with Sophie sitting beside me, her hand gripping mine. Ms. Anderson, this is Dr. Park from the Transplant Center. I'm calling with your compatibility results. I held my breath, suddenly unsure which answer I was hoping for. After reviewing all your tests, I'm afraid you are not a compatible donor for Ms. Williams. Your tissue typing shows several antigens that would likely cause rejection. Relief and disappointment crashed through me simultaneously. The decision had been made not by me, but by biology. Thank you, doctor, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can you send me the full results? My mother will want documentation for her medical team. After hanging up, I turned to Sophie, who was watching me intently. I'm not a match, I said simply. She nodded, squeezing my hand. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved mostly, and a little guilty for feeling relieved. I sighed, leaning back against the couch. Part of me wonders if I would have gone through with it if I had been compatible. You'll never have to know, Sophie said gently. And knowing you were willing to get tested says a lot, Nadia, more than most people would do in your position. We called our mother together to deliver the news. Her disappointment was palpable even through the phone, though she tried to hide it. I understand, she said flatly. Thank you for trying, Nadia. I'm not able to be a donor, I clarified, but I want to help you explore other options. The words surprised me as they left my mouth, but I realized I meant them. I can help with medical expenses for dialysis while you remain on the transplant list. And there are paired donation programs where Sophie could donate to someone else whose incompatible donor could donate to you. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. You would do that? After everything. Not for you, I said honestly. For Sophie, and for me, because I need to know I'm nothing like you. I wouldn't abandon someone in need, even someone who hurt me deeply. It was as close to forgiveness as I could offer, though I didn't name it as such. Not forgiveness exactly, but a refusal to let her actions determine mine. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and I researched kidney-paired donation programs where incompatible donor-patient pairs are matched with other pairs for successful transplants. We found a promising program at Mayo Clinic and helped our mother apply. Sophie decided to relocate to Chicago, finding a teaching position for the following school year. I've missed too many years with you and Dad, she explained. I don't want to miss any more. My father was overjoyed to have both his daughters in the same city again. Watching him and Sophie rebuild their relationship was both beautiful and bittersweet, a glimpse of what might have been if different choices had been made 24 years earlier. Michael, observing my renewed sense of purpose, proposed during a quiet dinner at home. You've shown me what real strength looks like, he said, sliding a vintage emerald ring across the table. Facing your past instead of running from it. I want to build a future with you, Nadia Anderson. I said yes, realizing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't expecting him to leave. The work I had done in therapy, combined with the closure of confronting my mother, had finally begun to heal my deepest wound. With Sophie settled in Chicago, we maintained cautious communication with our mother. Her health continued to decline, and despite our efforts, a suitable donor match through the paired program hadn't materialized. The shadow of her mortality hung over our tentative reconnection. I don't know if I can forgive her before she dies, I confessed to my therapist. Does that make me a terrible person? Forgiveness isn't an obligation, Nadia, Dr. Chen reminded me, and it doesn't happen on a timetable. Whatever you feel is valid. 6 months after our confrontation in Phoenix, my mother was hospitalized with complications. Sophie flew out immediately, while I followed a few days later. Walking into that hospital room was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My mother looked small in the hospital bed machines beeping around her. Her eyes, those blue eyes that had looked at me with such coldness years ago, now registered surprise and gratitude at my presence. I didn't expect you to come, she said, her voice weak. Neither did I admitted, taking the chair beside her bed. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about my mother lately, about how her coldness shaped me and how I passed that on to you. She took a labored breath. It's not an excuse. Nothing excuses what I did to you, but I want you to know I recognize the cycle now. Too late, but I see it. It was the closest thing to a real apology she had offered. Not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledgement of the harm done. In its own way, it was more meaningful than the dramatic pleas for forgiveness I had sometimes imagined. I hope Sophie breaks the cycle, I said quietly, and if I ever have children, I hope I do too. She nodded, tears slipping down her hollow cheeks. You already have. You're nothing like me, Nadia. You're stronger than I ever was. My mother died 3 weeks later, never having received a transplant. Sophie and I were both at her bedside, a family fractured but partially mended. We arranged a small funeral in Phoenix, where I met distant relatives and a few of my mother's friends. The stories they told of her were of a woman I barely recognized, suggesting she had changed in her later years. True reconciliation had eluded us, but something else had taken its place. Understanding, perhaps. Not excusing, never that, but seeing the broken woman behind the monstrous act of abandonment. Back in Chicago, life moved forward. I expanded my design studio to include a non-profit arm that renovated spaces for children in foster care. Sophie thrived in her new teaching position and formed a close bond with our father, making up for lost time with weekend fishing trips and movie nights. Michael and I set a wedding date with Sophie as my maid of honor and my father proudly preparing to walk me down the aisle. The planning brought up complicated emotions about family and belonging, but I worked through them instead of letting them derail my happiness. One evening, my father brought over more boxes from our old Pennsylvania house, which he had finally sold. Inside, one was a journal my mother had kept during her pregnancy with me. Reading it was revelatory, not because it excused anything, but because it showed a young woman excited to become a mother before whatever darkness overtook her. She wasn't always the person who left you, my father said gently. Something broke in her that she couldn't or wouldn't fix. But her failure isn't your story, Nadia. It never was. On a warm spring day, nearly a year after my mother's letter had arrived Sophie, my father and I visited the lakefront. We brought old family photos, including some of my mother in happier times. Not to eulogize her, but to reclaim pieces of our shared past that had been lost in the trauma of abandonment. I think about how different things could have been, Sophie said, looking out over the water. But then I might not be the person I am now, and you wouldn't be you. And I like who we are, I replied, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Despite everything, or maybe because of it. My journey from abandoned child to woman who created spaces of belonging wasn't over. The wound of my mother's rejection would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life rich with chosen family, meaningful work and love that didn't have to be earned. Most importantly, I had broken the cycle. When faced with the opportunity to withhold help from the person who had hurt me most, I had chosen compassion instead. Not forgiveness necessarily, but something perhaps more powerful, the refusal to let her actions determine the person I would become. In creating homes for others, I had finally found my own sense of belonging, not in physical spaces, but in the connections I had forged and maintained, despite every reason to wall myself off from love. That I realized was the most beautiful design of all. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between holding on to justified anger or showing compassion to someone who hurt you deeply? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and forgiveness. Remember that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Thank you for listening, and I wish you peace on your own healing journey. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation.